if we try to justify our ability to know the world around us by empirical data, by things we observe, this was Hume's argument. You can't do it. But if you presupposed that our minds were made by a benevolent creator who gave us those assumptions in order to make sense of the world that he also made, then there was a principle of correspondence between the way the mind worked and the way the world worked.
All worldviews have a set of ideas at their foundation that they can't prove. For me as a Christian, I believe in a benevolent God. And I believe that benevolent God made a good world that he put me in, and that he gave me a mind and senses that could perceive and understand the world, and that it is intelligible. I think what's going to happen today is we're going to play some clips and then we're going to react. Play a clip and react, play a clip and react. It's going to kind of go like that. What I would like to say from the outset is that I am in absolutely no way critiquing Stephen Meyer. I think he did a absolutely brilliant job. The reason we want to do this is because it's a fairly important cultural moment. I mean, Joe Rogan is the single biggest thing in media, period. I don't think there's any question of that. He gets at least tens, sometimes hundreds of millions of views on podcasts. So here's Joe Rogan talking to a devout Christian. We're going to listen to parts and see what happens.
Yep. Yeah. And
we're about to be unscripted.
Yeah, we're definitely unscripted because I just have a list of time codes sitting right here on my computer. Well, the first clip I have, we'll have to see what happens when we watch it and what we think about it. But he's just explaining from his perspective what the mind behind the universe concept means for us. And I think this is really interesting because it kind of shows us the foundation of like arguing against materialism and also just maybe where science came from in general. All right, so let's just give this one a play.
If we try to justify our ability to know the world around us by empirical data, by things we observe, this was Hume's argument. You can't do it. He was a radical empiricist and found that in order to make any sense of the sense impressions he had to presuppose the uniformity of nature. But to prove the uniformity of nature, he had to make reference to sensory observations. And so he was arguing in a circle. And so it came down, you couldn't justify the reliability of assumptions we make in our minds by observing the world. You had to use those assumptions to make sense of the observations. But if you presupposed that our minds were made by a benevolent creator who gave us those assumptions in order to make sense of the world that he also made, then there was a principle of correspondence between the way the mind worked and the way the world worked, in which case we could trust the basic reliability of the mind. And this turns out to be one of the key foundational assumptions that gave rise to modern science. It was called the idea of intelligibility. Newton, Boyle, Kepler, the great founders of modern science, thought that nature had secrets to reveal. There were patterns there to be revealed that we could understand because our minds had been made in the image of the same rational creator who had built rationality and design and pattern and lawful order into the world.
Okay, so that's basically his kind of philosophical take on why
science. Science developed. Science developed because of an assumption of intelligibility.
Right.
And and then he's saying that there are skeptics out there. This gives rise to modern postmodernism, whatever. This gives rise to postmodernism later, but there are skeptics who say, and he mentions Hume and Kant, that basically say, well, you can't actually prove that your mind or your senses work properly, which at a certain level is actually correct. You can't prove that. You can't prove that your eyes work because any test to prove that your eyes work, somebody's using their eyes to look at something to verify whether you saw the right thing, or you're using eyes to verify eyes, and therefore it's circular and it's bad. To try to verify your mind, you have to use your mind. Am I thinking properly? Well, I think I'm thinking properly because of this and that. But if your mind is damaged enough, then, you could be unconscious somewhere and you're dreaming about it, or you could be hallucinating something. Right. And it seems like reality to you. It seems like you're being rational, but you're actually not because your mind is broken.
Yeah.
And so he's right in saying that to move forward with science, we have to make assumptions. And it's not, we have this assumption about assumptions where we say like, oh, that's bad. You shouldn't assume things. You know what you do when you assume. We kind of have that in our culture, but no, all worldviews have a set of ideas at their foundation that they can't prove. There are some things that we simply can't prove. So for me as a Christian, I believe in a benevolent God, and I believe that benevolent God made a good world that he put me in, and that he gave me a mind and senses that could perceive and understand the world, and that it is intelligible. I believe that God is a God of order, not of chaos. And therefore that, this is why all of the Christian scientists, we're obsessed with putting math to things. What's the math behind the curvature of light in a lens? What's the math behind gravity? The things that Newton is doing. Why were they so into math? Because they thought that there's a rule.
Well, and I love that he referenced that. And for me, it's like a lot of the stuff that I listen to or from a skeptical perspective, listening to an atheist or skeptics talk about Christian faith or not believing in God or whatever. There's this angle of like being a skeptic is a good thing, and I think when I listen to his explanation that we just talked about, just listened to, it makes me realize how much you can't really know anything unless you have some type of metaphysical like truth.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about this before, and this is what has led to, like he said, has led to the rise of postmodernism, where there is no real truth.
It's only perspective. It's
all perspective. So everything is subjective. But then if everything is subjective, then you're either your own truth or you just can't know truth. So it becomes this kind of circular thing. But that's why it's so important. And to have an external truth, like to have God speaking in to our reality philosophically. And honestly, with skepticism and materialism, putting those together, you're not left with anything but skepticism in reality doesn't work, because much like you just said, if you really can't know anything, if you can't know that what you're seeing is correct, if you can't know then what you're feeling is correct, if you can't know what your relationships are correct, then it's like, well, what are you left with?
Yeah, and I think that's what I wanted to land this segment on, was the fact that people voice these skepticisms. You can't trust a story, you can't trust words, you can't trust your mind, you can't trust this, that, and the other. But nobody can live like that. Mm-hmm. Like all of these sort of philosophies or ideas are, in the end, they're just kind of dumb. Because we're thinking about something, we're talking about something, but you know what? You can't live like it. So the Christian assumption, Jesus talks about how, like, if you build on me, you're building on a rock. If you not build on me, you're building on sand. It's just not stable. It's just you're going to build this structure and it's going to collapse. All these intellectual structures that are built not on God, they're built on sand. Mm-hmm. So their underlying assumptions, and again, everyone's got underlying assumptions. Rogan assumes miracles aren't possible. He assumes resurrection's not possible, clearly. And he's going to go forward with that. So then he's hearing the Bible. He's like, well, those parts are lies then, so that he's got an underlying assumption. We have them as well. I believe there's a real benevolent God that made this world. And then I think that's a more stable set of underlying assumptions. Those are built on rock, not on sand. And so then I feel like we as Christians can build intellectual structures that stand up a lot better, mm-hmm. that hold up. You can actually live like a Christian. You can live like you believe a good God in heaven made a good earth, and they gave me a sound mind that I can use to understand it, and to move forward in it. That makes a lot more sense to me than the skepticism that he's describing there.
And if the universe is just random events, then why should it make sense? Yeah. If it's all a bunch of randomness, then how do you make intelligibility out of randomness?
That's right. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. How do you make a mind that can perceive and understand?
Yeah.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, click like and subscribe. It really helps us. And if you really enjoyed it, go on over to our website, thelandinthebible.com, and become a supporter. It helps us generate more content and gives you access to our full library of video and Bible study content.